Hello and welcome to this new developer's starter guide to Next.js, where I go into a little bit more detail to support new developers getting started with Next.js, React, HTML, CSS, Bootstrap, GitHub. So this is a complete starter's introduction. Of course, if you think you need a quicker introduction to Next, then please head over to my Next.js Quick Start Guide in this next tutorial series. So like I said, this tutorial is aimed at anyone aspiring to learn web development. I find that for some students learning CSS, HTML, it can be a little bit boring to begin with, although essential. So I'm starting to advocate the idea that frameworks such as Next.js or Gatsby provide a good level of abstraction for new developers. And I think for new developers, this abstraction allows new developers to focus on the core skills, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but at the same time be in touch and distance to the tools and features that make developing more fun and interesting. So this way of learning puts you right in the middle of development, which can be a little bit overwhelming, but please don't be. Web development is a marathon and it's not a sprint. Okay, so with that said, let's have a look at the coverage for this tutorial. So here in this tutorial, we're going to start with the installations or the requirements for installations. We'll go through those. Now, I am using a Windows operating system in this tutorial simply because it still is the most popular operating system according to many statistics. So please don't switch off if you have Mac or Linux. This tutorial can be completed on any operating system. And if you do have any problems, well, just leave me a message or a comment and I'll try and get back to you. So once we've completed the installations, we'll go through creating a new project in Next, running the server, and instantly just by installing Next, we'll have a template that's ready to be displayed in the browser and we can then work from there. So once we've got that going, we'll then go for a quick tour around the Next.js environment, get to know the folder and file structure a little bit before we then move into building some simple pages. So going back to this abstraction idea again, so typically new developers would build with HTML and CSS and you would build single pages. So Next provides that type of facility. What we're going to find with Next is that it has an intuitive page-based routing system. So, which is very familiar to how new developers might create web pages. So we're going to build single pages and then we're going to look at linking the pages together. So here we're just going through the basic steps new developers would probably go through. And then in the next phase, we'll look at how to incorporate custom CSS. And then we go to the next step of importing Bootstrap into the project and start to play around with how that interacts with our project. So we won't necessarily go too far into the building process of building an actual website. We will cover the basic principles and build a few pages and link them up, etc. But here's all about reference, about developing a baseline, a template for which you can then develop your HTML, CSS, JavaScript skills further and then work in this environment to apply them. So our final step will be to utilize GitHub. So we're going to upload our website. So we're then going to make it available so that we can use a web server from Vercel, which is a free service that allows us to host our websites on the internet. So that'll be the last step. So we'll have a live website. Okay, so at this point you might have a few questions. What is React? What is Next.js, Gatsby? What is Bootstrap? What is GitHub? And so on. These are all great questions which I hope to answer within the tutorial. Of course, it does also give you a good starting direction if you haven't already started to explore some of these technologies, as they are heavily used within industry. The first part of this tutorial is all about installation. So here we're going to need to install a code editor or have a code editor available. I'm using Visual Studio Code, so you can just go ahead, type that into Google and download. It's available on Mac, Linux, and Windows. So next up, we're going to need to install some JavaScript packages or frameworks, and we can do that utilizing the Node Package Manager. So just for ease of installation, we're going to also go ahead and install Node.js, which comes with these packages. That's going to allow us then to download and install Next.js. For those who don't need a video tutorial on how to install Visual Studio Code, then please head over to the next part of this tutorial. For those who do need a little bit of a helping hand, then simply navigate to Google, type in Visual Studio Code. So from here, you'll be presented with a few links. So what you're looking for here is just select download Visual Studio Code. So there are a few options, like I said, that it is available on Windows, Mac and Linux. So here we can just use the user installer, or just select the blue button here. That's going to download for Windows 10. So there isn't any other requirements that we need or any other dependencies to get this working. This should be a straightforward process of downloading and then just going through the process of selecting next, next and next. So accept the agreements, press next. So I do have some options here. So it'd be worth creating maybe a desktop icon and leave these last options available, add to path. That's going to make it potentially easier to work with in the future. So press next and then install. And there we go. So that should just install nicely now. Then we should be presented with the finished screen. So once we've finished, it will ask us to launch. We're just going to launch it. And then I'll just give you a quick overview of how this works. So we've got tabs up here, so we can enter or have multiple pages working concurrently. So just close this folder. So if you do have anything here, it's because I was working with it before. Just going to close that folder. So that starts us off probably where you're looking at. So like I said, we've got tabs. On the left-hand side here, we can use the Explorer. This is where all our files are going to be. And that's pretty much all we need to know. So if, for example, we wanted to start a new project, let's go to my desktop, create a new folder here called new. Imagine we wanted to create a new project here. Well, what I'd need to do is I can copy that path and then go into File, go to Open Folder, and then paste that in, select the folder, and now we're inside of that folder, our working folder. So this is generally how I work, and then we can add some new files, or I can right-click and add new files and folders here. So let's just add a new file, .html, for a HTML page. And then from here I can start typing, and you'll see that the page is now entered or has been available, or is being displayed in the folder that we created. So that's our working directory. So that's generally how we're going to work here. Now, if we did have two files, so new.html, then we can also work in a window. So if I select this button here, we can split the screen. That can be useful when we've got some CSS on this side and some HTML or JavaScript on the other side. And I can just select that again, and I can make more windows, etc. Or I can just close, and that will close it all out. If I have loads of tabs open here, I can just go here and select close all or close save. That will close the tabs. So there we go. That's a quick introduction there to Visual Studio Code. Of course, you can use any program that you want. The handy thing about this is it comes also with a terminal, so that we can install all of our dependencies and packages directly from this tool instead of having to open up a command prompt. Okay, so next up is Node.js. So like I said before, we're going to need Node for the package manager. It's the simplest way of doing this. It's handy to have Node available for other developments. So let's just go ahead and select the Node download. So I typed in Node.js in Google, and then again I'm just going to install the Windows installer. There's no need to look at all of this. You notice that it is available for Mac also, and you should be able to get it for Linux as well. Additional platforms down here. So let's just go ahead and install it for Windows. So again, this should be a straightforward process of next. There aren't really any options that stand out to me that I think that we're going to need to discuss here. I think there's one at the end that we want to deselect. So press next, accept that, press next. We can use the default installation folder. So press next again, and we'll just utilize everything here. Yep, so I press next, and we don't want to select this automatically install necessary tools. So I just press next and then install. I think we're good to go. So just wait for that to install. Okay, so we're done. So like I said, we installed the installed Node.js for the npm manager, so the node package manager, so we can install next. But we'll just check to see if that's installed correctly by typing in cmd at start. And then what we can do is type in npm -- version. That's just going to tell us what version is installed. So that's all worked successfully. We should now be able to go ahead and install next and start our project. So it's probably worth noting at this point that some people won't like to install these packages or feel a little bit apprehensive about installing all these packages just to try out some software or some development. Well, if you feel comfortable, there are plenty of different virtualized tools out there. So what I'm doing here is I'm actually utilizing VMware to show off this tutorial. So you can definitely download VMware Workstation 15 Player for free nowadays and then install an operating system within that and then work within that operating system. So that's if you don't want to install all these softwares on your main operating system. That's a good alternative. Obviously, you're going to need a machine that has around about 8 gig of RAM and a nice little processor with a couple of threads or cores in order for you to run 2 operating systems at once. But that can be a good option if you don't want to install the packages on your main computer. Okay, so the next step is we need to install Next or start a Next project. So at this junction, let's just say that Next is a framework that's built on React. So React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. So this is how I kind of look at it, or we can look at it to begin with. React.js, developed by Facebook, is a wonderful tool to make small applications or additions to our website. So if we wanted something reactive or something interactive on our page, we might use a React framework, which is essentially a JavaScript library that allows us to build those simple interactions. Now, what if you wanted to build a whole website with JavaScript or utilize it as a platform? So we can do that with React, but there are some common pitfalls to that. And so, therefore, we could utilize a technology or framework like Next. So I think to generalize, Next is a platform or a framework which utilizes React, which adds features features that don't exist in React to make it into a package that's really great to build websites. So let's head into the Next website. We should find some documentation. So I'm just really showing you this if you haven't already found it already. I'll zoom out a little bit and it tells you how to set up. So this is what we need to do. We need to create a new folder for our project and run npx. So npx. So normally when you're installing packages from the command line, remember we installed Node.js. I said that we needed the npm, the node package manager. Well, what we also have is the npx. So with npm, you install packages. So you install X, then you install Y, then Z. So with npx, it allows you just to specify, oh yeah, I want to build this type of project. And it will then also install other dependencies and everything that you need to get it running. So instead of using npm installing things individually. So this is essentially one of the reasons why we're using npx to install. So you can see here that we need to type in npx create next app. And then I'm presuming after that, we then type in the name of the app. Okay, so let's go ahead and on our C drive, let's build a new folder. We're going to call this next. So that's in the C drive. I'll just copy the location and open up Visual Studio Code. And then from here, I go to File and then New Open Folder. And then select our folder. So now I'm inside of that project folder. So I'm now inside of that project folder. I can open up the terminal And then notice that this is a PowerShell, so by default, that's okay. We can deal with that. So for some reason on virtual machines, it kind of looks like it's disappeared, but you can see when I clear it, it is actually there. So what we need to do is type in this then. So npx create next app. So we go ahead and do that. And then we need to give this a name. So our new app's going to be called new app. Okay, so you notice that we're then asked about a template. So what we can do is we can use the example template just to kind of peruse around the next application and see how potentially to develop and explore some of the different options. Or we can use this default starter, which is a little bit slimmed down. So let's just start with the default starter app. So that's going to provide us or set up a template within our project so that the website starts automatically. Okay, so we'll give that a couple of seconds. Okay, so that's done. Notice when it's finished, it gives us an idea of how to actually run our production server. So this isn't like building a HTML page where we can just run it in the browser. We need to run a server in order to get this working. And so by default, there is a lightweight server that we can run to get our website running. So let's just open up our folder, our project folder. Notice now we have this new app folder. Everything is inside of that. So in order for us to progress, notice that we're currently in C Next folder. So I just need to change directory into that new folder, which is called new app. So I'm now inside of that folder. Apologies, I can't zoom in here. So now I'm inside of that app. I can now run this command npm run dev. So that's going to start the lightweight server and for us to then actually visit the web page that we've just built. So npm run dev. So that'll take a couple of seconds. Notice that I need to allow that access. So here it shows us where the website is going to be hosted, HTTP, localhost, and port 3000. So if I go back into my browser, type in, localhost 3000, we can now see that we have this page, and this is the welcome page to our application. So our server is running correctly, our website is working correctly. We now have Next installed, and we're ready to start our program or our application. So while we're at this point, let's just go through some simple basic things. So we started our project and the server is running. Now you can actually develop your application while this is on. And if there is a problem, it will tell you in the terminal potentially what the problem is and we can correct it. So it's good to potentially have the server on all the time. If we want to close the server, I'm going to press Control and C, and it's going to ask me, yep. So I press Y to close, and now the server has stopped working. And then I can restart the server by typing in npm run dev again, and so on. So that's how we're going to start and stop the server. So now let's just go into our application very quickly and start to think about slimming this down so that we can build our own application. So let's just go ahead and have a look at some of these folders here. So we've got the node modules. So these are modules or dependencies that we might want to import into our project to get our project working. So later in this tutorial, we install Bootstrap, which is a CSS framework, and that will be installed into this node modules. So I'll then instruct the website or our application to utilize that module. So that's where the modules reside. So when you, for example, upload this to GitHub or save your project, you don't need to save this modules folder, because what's going to happen is that once you recreate this project, we're going to run a command that's going to look inside of your package JSON, and it's going to look at all the dependencies that are needed for this project, and it's going to install it for you. So that's how you're going to run a project. And we'll go through this again. That's how you're going to recreate a project if you want to, because this node modules folder is going to be rather large, and it isn't something that you want to upload if you're using a service like GitHub, for example. So next off, we have a folder by default called Pages. You'll notice that there's some files already inside of it. So like I said before, React essentially uses this page-based routering. So we're going to add a new page into here, and then we can simply route to it. So let me just give you a quick example. So I right-click New File. I'm just going to call this test.js. So notice here I'm not using HTML. I'm going to be utilizing JavaScript files here. So I do that, and then what I need to do, I'm just going to copy and paste this onto my test file and just remove some of the things that I don't need. Now, I realize straight away that there's probably an easier way of doing this. So I'm just going to put hi there. Just get rid of that head. So this is how I'm going to build my page. Export default function. This is going to be called test. Let's not worry about the actuals at the moment. Return. So return just means what's going to be sent to the page. So I'm going to return this piece of HTML here, which has got the word hi. So let's not worry about that just for now. I'm just showing you the fact that if we make a page inside this folder, we can navigate to it. So notice that by default, there's a file here called index. Now, by default on a web server, typically we would create a new file called index.html. That would be our root directory, or sorry, our root page, so that when we go to our domain name, it will find that page first and serve that to the screen. It's the same principles here, except we're using .js. So this is what you're looking at when we go to this page here. This is all the code that makes up that page. So what we've done now is built a new page called test, and we can navigate to that by simply using /test. And you can see that it now says hi because it's serving this page that we just created called test on the page or to our browser. Okay, so that's the general principles. We'll develop this further, but this is how we're going to build page for our website. We're going to add new pages in this folder called pages. Okay, so next up, we've got this public folder. So this public folder, we're going to utilize this for adding images for our website. So this is where we're going to store our images, potentially some CSS. Not so much probably, but mainly for images and any other thing that we want to public or utilize resources that we want to utilize on our website. So I've already mentioned the package.json file. Here you can see, for example, the dependencies that are needed to get this website running. So I need Next and then the version, I need React and the React DOM. So these technologies here need to be in place in order to actually run this application. So that just spells that out, and I think we're good to go. So we're really powering through this tutorial now. So we've thought about the installation requirements and we've installed the necessary packages. We created a new project and we run the server, and I've showed you how to stop and start the server. Now, it was a quick tour. I've given you some general overview of the folder structure there. There isn't really too much to know at this point or to learn. We're going to utilize pages now and create some folders to build some routes on our website. So now let's head back into the project, and we're just going to create some more pages for our project. So just as a introduction, we're just going to delete test.js. Let's make a new page here. We're going to call this about us.js, and then we'll create a new page called blog.js. So we've got 3 pages here. We've got the index page, the home page essentially, a page called blog.js, and an about us page. So these are the 3 pages that we're going to build for this simple website. So you're not just limited to building pages here. What I can also do is right click and make a new folder. So I can make a new directory. So here I might want to call this, for example, news. So inside of here, I can right click and add a new file and call it news.js. Now remember, this is a folder. So in actual fact, if I want to run the root for this folder, then I need to make a page called index.js. Okay, so if I've got a folder, I'm going to need to create a file called index.js. So if I go back now and go to, for example, news, notice that this is live, is serving. You can it now tells you that that page has been deleted. The page doesn't exist. So if I go to news now, that's going to run the page. I don't have anything inside of it. That's why I'm getting a problem here. That's going to run this page here. So what I can also do is create a new file inside of news called latest.js, and I can then utilize that from news/latest. You kind of get the idea, hopefully, at this point, what's going on here. So we can create pages and folders to build our structure for our website. Okay, so maybe you have a little bit of HTML knowledge. You know that when you make a HTML page, you need some sort of boilerplate like this. You've got the HTML tags and then the head area, and then you've got a body section, and inside the body section you have some text or some content that you want to display on the page. So you'll notice that when we build pages, we aren't using HTML, we're using JavaScript. So things are slightly different. So going back to what I said about that Next provides a level of abstraction. So this is a type of thing that we don't need to worry about. This is going to be automatically injected on the page before it's previewed. And we'll have a look at that in a second. And also maybe we can discuss in a while about where this comes from, how this gets generated. So in order to build a page, like we briefly saw earlier, we're going to need to use JavaScript. So there's probably no need for me to explain every line here. You just need to understand that this is the equivalent boilerplate if you want to then start to build pages. So this was it right here. So we had an export default function index, and we're returning whatever's inside of here. So the basic parameters here are the fact that we're telling, in this case, we're utilizing this essentially as React code right here. So essentially what we're doing is we're building a component. We're calling it index. So we're creating a function called index. And this component is going to return, in this case, it's just going to return hi onto the page. So this is the return here. This is what's going to be displayed on your page or returned to your browser to be rendered, essentially. So that's where we're going to start building. So notice we don't need the HTML boilerplate. That's going to be injected. So this is the news index. So let's just go into our news index, which should be this here without the slash. So that's going to run the page that we just generated. So let's just go into the inspect, and we can see that we do have a HTML tag set. We've got some a head section, a body section, and inside of here we've got this div ID next, and inside of that we have our divs that we created on the page, and we have the word hi, which represents this piece of code here. So that's what's being injected onto this page here and is being displayed in the browser. So we can do away with writing the HTML boilerplate, but what we need to remember is that the return must have an outer set of divs. So what we can't do here is something like this, for example. So there has to be a container, an outer container, otherwise it will return an error. So if I were to save that, go back, see it says failed to compile. So it must be wrapped in an enclosing tag. Okay, so let's go back there. So much of the other principles of HTML apply. So for example, if you wanted to create a p tag, for example, all the content tags are going to be available if you're familiar with any HTML. So what you can do now is obviously learn a little bit of HTML and go through that and start applying it right here. So if I do that, well, that's just going to put it into a p tag, and you can see it's now been updated and it's the highs in a p tag. Okay, so now let's think about CSS. Okay, so like I said, we'll move on to a little bit of CSS first. So let's just change this about a bit. So So we'll go ahead and we'll do CSS first, and then we'll link the pages together, and then we'll have a little introduction with Bootstrap and develop with that, and then we'll go to GitHub and then deploy to the web. Okay, so CSS. So there's a number of different ways we can apply CSS within this framework. So probably a common approach for new developers learning CSS is we would utilize some inline styling. So here what I can do traditionally is type in style equals and then use, for example, color blue, for example. So that would be a traditional approach. Now we're using React here within Next. Our React utilizes something called JSX, which is essentially a syntax that allows us to easily incorporate HTML and JavaScript together on the page. So because we're utilizing JSX, this is going to change slightly. So we're now going to change this to equals and then use the double curly braces. And then inside of here, we're just going to declare as normal. So color, and then we need the singles, blue. Okay, so that's going to perform the same action. So a bit of inline styling then. Of course, you can extend that to whatever you want. So let's go back into there and press refresh. Okay, you can now see that we didn't need to refresh, but the actual letters are blue. So I've gone ahead just to show you an example how to extend and add more here into the inline. Notice I use the comma, and then this time I use font size. Now, if you're familiar with CSS, normally you would use, for example, font size. But notice that there is no hyphen there. It's simply font and using the camel case, using capital S size. So you will also find with JSX that the actual properties here, or the CSS properties inline, will change slightly. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that, if you head over to this React Native styling cheat sheet here on GitHub, this will take you through and get you familiar with all the different elements. So if you are familiar with CSS, like I said, all you need to do really is take away the hyphen and use a capital for the second word. That's the general concept there. You can notice, for example, min width, min height normally has a hyphen in between. So there's two different options to include style on this page, I call it. So we've got inline here, and this can get a little bit messy. Of course, if you've got quite a large set of CSS properties here, that's going to make things a little bit hard to read. So if we just remove that, like I said, there's two options here for kind of on-page CSS. First of all, what we can do is before we return or above the export here, what we can do is we can create a new variable for a font style. So we can make that equal. So we can prepare the, essentially we can prepare the CSS right here. So font size, that's going to be, so same type of syntax here, 50 pixels. And then we use the comma and then color again. And then we just change that to red. So we can prepare our style here. So that makes it potentially easier for us to read our HTML or our JSX right here. So we can then import that in. So again, all we need to do is type in style equals, and then the single curlies, and then just name our variable there. So font style. So we reference that. So if we go back into our code, we can now see it's turned red. It still stays at 50. But you see that it does get injected into what looks like inline styling. So it does get injected into that area because obviously we're placing it right there. So that's a different way of working if we want to. So simply creating this variable here with these properties, and then we import that into the style. Okay, so a bit of a more advanced way, which we won't go through in this tutorial, but I'll make you aware of it. We can now also add style. So for example here, within our return, we're adding some style. So I've headed over to the index page. So by default, you'll see that we've got something called style.jsx, and there's loads of style here. And then underneath that, you might see the style.jsx global. and then open and close style. So that's just part of the return. So that's part of the return here, as well as the HTML. So that's just another method of setting up your CSS, which we can look at in a different tutorial. But notice it's there. So the next one I want to make you familiar with is generating or creating our own CSS page. So typically, you're learning CSS and HTML, you get to the point where you start to use external style sheets. So I just want to show you a simple way of creating an external style sheet here within this Next framework, and then import it onto our page. So we're going to create a CSS page and then import it onto this index page here in News. Okay, there really is many different ways of importing CSS. I just thought of another way. So let's just go ahead. So let's make a new folder now. We're going to call this components. So we're going to create a CSS module. So we're going to create a new file here, and I'm going to call that index with a capital. It's a component, so capital index.module.css. Okay, so now I've created this page. Let's just build some simple CSS. So I'm just going to, let's go for red. So notice that we're using this as a CSS page. So we're not having to follow the JSX format here. We're just following the basic CSS. In this case, dot for a class. Class is called text, color, and it's going to be red. And then we're going to give it a font size of 100 pixels. So this might be a little bit more familiar for people who are learning CSS, because you can apply the CSS directly. You don't have to then also relearn CSS and use JSX type of format. So once we've got that in place, we can now import this file onto our page here. So let's just get rid of this styling right here. Okay, and now let's import this in. So this is the beauty, or one of the main principles of utilizing this type of technology here. So React, it's a component-based development system. So we're building small components, reusable components that we can reuse on different pages. So let's import this in. So we go ahead and we'll run an import. So import, so we're going to take that code in index module CSS, and we're going to import it into this page here. So import styles. So we're going to reference it by the word style. So we're going to import, and we're going to reference it by styles in here from, and then what we need to do is work out where the file is here. Okay, so we're in this folder called News. So what we need to do is just work backwards. So we're in index. So we need to go out of this folder into the page folder, and then we need to go out of the page folder and then go into the components folder. So we're here at the moment. We need to go back one into the pages, go back another one to go into the root directory, and then go forward into components and then into index module here. So we need back, so we go back 2 folders, and then we can go into components, and then we've got the index. I was expecting it to come up then, index module .css. Okay, so we import that in. So this page is, or this file has been imported in, and we're going to reference to it via the styles. So notice that it's grayed out because we're not actually declared or utilized it here yet. So what we need to do is put it where we need it. So we're going to utilize it right here. So here we're going to have class name equals, and then styles. That's what it's called, or that's how we're referencing the CSS styles. Notice that it's lit up now because we're utilizing it, and then the text. Okay, so here what we've done, notice that we're using a class called text. So we're referencing that right here. So class name styles, go into styles file, and look for text and make this class name text and utilize this style here. That's essentially what it's saying. It's a little bit maybe complex, but you can see that it's been applied. We've now got a red high that's 100. So we can see the information right here, index text, color red, font size 100. So that's working. So that's another way of doing it. So let me just show you one more way of importing CSS into your program. So let's just remove this. So this is probably the most, I'll say simplistic way, but this is probably a familiar way of working if you want to follow HTML and CSS traditionally and just import it into the page. Okay, so we want to include a CSS page that's available for all of these pages. So we want to make something that's kind of global, that can be accessed on every single page. So what we need to do for this is to generate or create a file called _app.js. So inside of pages, we're going to make a new file. We're going to call this _app.js. So there is a reason why this is called _app, and it has its roots in React. We don't necessarily need to, I think at this point, explain why that is, other than this is a way to kind of incorporate something in the whole project. So I suppose we could loosely say this. When your application runs, your application is going to look for app.js, work from there, and then app.js is going to serve the other pages. So these other pages here are going to be kind of injected into the middle of app.js, or it's going to be wrapped by app.js. And of course, anything we declare in app.js is then going to be available within these other pages. So it's a little bit abstract, but we can do this. So let's now create a new page. So just make sure I'm in the right place. So let's just create a new file here called styles.css. So this is just a traditional style sheet that we can create here. Let's just move this across. So I'm just going to paste that into there. I'm going to change this to blue again so we can see the change, and we call that 200. Okay, so that's my style sheet set up as per normal, as following this normal CSS syntax. So now what I want to do is import it into my project. So in the pages and then the app.js file that I've created, I now want to import this in. So I'm going to say I want this to import in. Now I need to find it. So I'm in the news folder, so I need to go back one. Then I'll be in the page folder. I need to go back one again and then access this file. So ... So that allows me to go back folders. And now I want style.css. So I've just made a link to this page here. So what I need to do now is basically load everything else. So we won't go over this in any detail here, but essentially this is going to return then the component that we need. So like I said, this is kind of like the wrapper around all these other files here. So when your application loads, it looks for this file first, and then your page will essentially be injected into here, and then everything else is wrapped around it so that this import will be available within all of your components and pages. Okay, so that is now available, or this is now available in all of my pages. So let's go back here. So this is called a class called text. So now let's utilize this in our page. So because we've added the app.js file, we're going to need to just stop the server, Control-C and Y, and then just run the server again. So npm run dev. So that should then load all these new parameters that we set here, the imports, etc. So with that done, and ensuring that we've got the class name equals text within our index page within the news, go back to our page and you can see that it's now working. So I can now test that. So if I change the style sheets to 10 pixels, press save, you can see it updates. So we can work with that in a live state also. Okay, so that might become or that might be preferred for you to utilize a style sheet like this, particularly as I've kind of suggested at the start of the tutorial. This was for beginners, and it allows you kind of to work with HTML and CSS to learn it and to apply it straight away. So yeah, that was all the CSS options that I can think of right now. It did turn into a CSS fest then, but yeah, there are lots of options, and that really does mirror what we've done so far. There's lots of different ways we could have done many of these different tasks. Okay, so we've set out this custom CSS. I think we've done that. So next up is linking pages, or linking between pages. So obviously we've got some pages here, news. If we go back here, we've got the index page, and then I think we had an about us page that we need to set up still. So let's first of all go ahead and just close that, and we're just going to close all the windows there. So we've got a few pages here. I'm just going to remove the news for now. I'm going to delete that. So I'm left with the index, the blog page, and the about us page. Okay, so let's just first of all go ahead and create the basic JavaScript needed to create the page. So as an alternative to earlier, what you can do, instead of exporting default and then calling the function, we can use the export default at the end, for example. It's just another way of working. It's completely up to you how you want to work. So I've done that for the about us page, and we can go ahead and just set up the, let's just call that about us so we know where we are. So we do the same for the blog. And then what we'll also do on the index page is we'll just remove everything from there, and we call this index. So we just need to change the function to index. And we probably need to do that on the blog as well. Yeah. Okay, so now I've got the 3 pages working. So let's have a look at how we can now make a connection or build links between the pages. So like CSS, there really are many different ways we can link things together, but this being a beginner's guide, let's just create some simple links. So the next framework provides simple linking, so we can import that into our project. So that's the first thing. We need to import link from, and then next slash link. So here we're building, we're importing a next functionality, or next function that we can utilize to build simple links between pages. So we're going to need that on each page. Now, you begin to wonder, if I need to put that on each page, would that not be better off being placed right here? Because then that will be available throughout the whole project potentially. So for now, we're just going to put it within our pages up the top. So we go on the about us page, on the blog page, and on the index page. So that incorporates that function on these pages. So now what I can do is go ahead and create a simple link. So to build links, it really is very simple. We simply just need to utilize this import or reference it. So link in a tag there. So don't forget to use a capital. So here basically we're saying, okay, we're going to build a link. So what we need now is some properties. So like we would build an anchor tag. So instead of link, instead of a, we're using link. So href and then equals, and then in doubles, we're going to just define the link, which in this case is just going to be slash, right? So we can then, in between, just typing a word to reference. Now what we need to do here in actual fact is wrap this within a tags. So the format here is that we need some a tags, and then we type in link. So that's the actual word that's going to be displayed. We click on that, it's going to take us to this link here. So let's just build another link to the blog page and the about us page. So about us, and the blog page. So you can see what's going on here. So about us and then blog. So now we go back into our project. We should have on the index page, we should have our links here nicely tied together. So if I click on, actually, let's just create a PR. So let's just now click on link. It takes us to the next link, about us and blog. So you can see that these links are working. The top link, did that work? Yes, it did. Okay. Yeah, it just takes us to there. So all of our links are working, and that's just a simple way of creating links. So what we could do now potentially is just copy and paste these links onto our other page. But of course we don't want to do that, because what we're doing here is that we're just repeating code over the pages, and our goal always is to follow the dry principles, don't repeat yourself. So what we want to try and do now is export some of this code into its own component. So we're now going to build a component inside components which holds all this information so that we can utilize it on different pages. So let's go ahead and just create a new file. I'm just going to call that Navbar. I'm just going to call it nav, and that's a JavaScript file. So notice that all components will have a capital letter in its name. So I'm going to call that nav, and then inside of my nav here, I'm just going to set out a return. So if I just, for example, copy this and then put it on my nav, so we don't need that. So all I want to return are my links. So I'm going to change the function to nav. Okay, so that's now in place. Now I do want to import the links because I'm utilizing links here, but the good thing about this is what I can now do is remove it from here, because I only need to call it once. So that kind of removes that piece of code, or having to copy and paste or utilize that same piece of code on every page. So let's just remove the links. So this is now our index page. Let's just remove everything here so we know what we're doing. So this is our index page. So what I want to do now is import this navigation bar onto this page. So maybe you get the idea now. I'm going to use the word import, and then we want to import nav or the navbar. So this is just a name that we're going to reference inside of our code here. So from, and then we need to find it. So remember that we're in the pages here. So we need to go back one folder and then go into the components folder and then select nav. So -- to go back one, and then we're going to go into the components, and then inside of that we've got something called nav. Okay, so that imports it onto our project. We now just need to define where we want to put it. So we can build a set of tags with the keyword nav. So it's got to be the same word as the import file, this alias here. So we link that together, and what should now happen is all this code here should now be injected right here. So let's just test that on our page, and you can see it's already working. So what we can do now, okay, so let's include that on all the pages here. So we're going to import the nav on the blog and on the About Us page. So we then go ahead and just put the navigation bar where we want it. There we go. So we go back to my pages now. We can navigate. Oh, that's not worked. The blog. Just save it. It seems to be an error. Nav blog. Okay, so everything is working okay. So it just needs a little bit of an update. So you can see that I can navigate to all my pages now through my links. So although we've only generated a very small, simple, basic, crazy website, we have covered quite a lot of material here, and this is all good information. So what we're going to do now is introduce Bootstrap. So if you haven't used Bootstrap before, think of it as basically a CSS framework. So it's a library of CSS code that we can just drop into our project and build wonderfully quickly with. So we can rapidly build our application with it. So I just wanted to incorporate it into our project so that we can quickly build our website to make it look like something functional. So first of all, in order to get Bootstrap working in your project, we just need to go ahead into the console. So open up a new terminal, and I've selected the node. So I'm just going to close the server, and I'm now going to run npm install and then just the word Bootstrap. So what's going to happen now is it's going to find the Bootstrap npm, and so the Bootstrap software, and it's going to download from all those packages into my node modules. So inside of node modules now, if I go into and look alphabetically for Bootstrap, you can see I've now got a folder called Bootstrap in there. So that's now available for my project. So now I can import that into my project. So to import it into my project and make it available throughout my whole website, well, I just go into the app.js file. And so here I'm going to import, and now I just need to link to where the Bootstrap was installed within the node modules folder. So it was a folder called Bootstrap, and then inside of there, there's a folder called dist. Inside of that is a folder called CSS, and I'm just going to use the default Bootstrap CSS file. There is a min file in there, but I'm just going to use the Bootstrap CSS file. Okay, so that's all there is to it there. So what I can now do is head over to Bootstrap, and I can now look at the documentation and get some components. So the first component I'm going to need is my navigation bar, so the Navbar. And what I'm going to do is just copy and paste a Navbar, this Navbar here. So I'm going to copy that code there, and I'm now going to put that in my Navbar. So just under here, I'm just going to paste that right there. Okay, so that's the Navbar that I've just pasted in. So from here, I just need to work out what's what. So for example, this is my unordered list. Inside of here, I've got list items. So these are the items that would be displayed on the navigation bar. So what I need to do now is integrate this code here into this here. So how I'm going to do this is fairly simple. I just need to copy and paste this link. I'm going to put it right here. So let's just remember that essentially the link represents the A here. So I just need to give it a class name. So class name equals, it should be called navlink. So this is just following the CSS from Bootstrap. So I can remove that now. And then I need to set out a link. So the link for this is going to be / because it's the home page. And then I just want to rename this homepage. There we go. So what I can do now is get rid of that and then have a look at my page. Oh, let's just get rid of that also. So if I go back to my page, obviously I need to turn the server on. So into the terminal. So I select, PowerShell. So from here, just type in CLS because it's invisible. So from here, I need to go back into my folder. Notice I'm just in next. So if I do a DII, you can see I've got a project folder here called new app. So I change directory into new app. This can be a common problem. So I press CLS to clear that. So I'm now in the right folder. So now I can now type in npm start dev. Okay, so there seems to be a problem. Sorry, run dev. Okay, so that's now running. So if I go back into my code, just to the home page, I've now got my navbar. Notice that it's collapsed. So let's just open that up. And now I've got my homepage. So it says homepage. Wonderful. So that is now working. That should take me to my homepage and so on. So what I can do now is just add the other links into it. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I've got 3 links here. One to my blog, and then the other one goes to the About Us. So I put that in. So blog. But you get the general idea at this point, potentially. This is how you're going to create the links. So that's all now in place. So I should now be able to access that on all the pages. Yep. There we go. It's probably worth mentioning the reason why it's not formatted correctly, because I forgot to use the capital N. So if I format that correctly, it looks starting to look a little bit better there. But you'll notice that it's not really following the syntax, or sorry, it's not really following Bootstrap how it should be looking. So what you need to do in actual fact is put the class inside of the A tag here. So this will then make the link format correctly as it's specified or how it's used in Bootstrap. So now we've got the links. Okay, so now we've got the links all in place. You could now have a look at some of the other components that are available. Let's go for a Jumbotron. So I'm just going to put a Jumbotron, copy that code. So on my index page, underneath my navigation bar, I'm now going to have a Jumbotron here. So the problem here, you'll notice, is that I've got an outer set and an inner set of divs. That shouldn't be a problem, but there's something conflicting here. Should be a simple copy and paste. So let's just finish this off by typing in class name. So this is something that you'll need to change on yours. Okay. And then we need to close this HR tag. Okay, so there we go. That was the problem there. So now we've got that in place. If we go back to the home page, we can now see we've got this wonderful Jumbotron right here. So we can change the, in the navbar, we can change the name. So at the moment it says navbar. So we call this our new site, just for now. So we now have a new site and so on. Okay, so that was probably the quickest ever introduction to Bootstrap, but hopefully you get the flavor there. So we've incorporated Bootstrap into our project. We've made that Bootstrap framework, that CSS available. And what we're doing now is we're just dipping into the documentation, copy and pasting some of the different elements that it offers, and it utilizes the Bootstrap CSS that's pre-made to create those nicely looking elements on our page. Essentially what's happening there if you're not used Bootstrap, but you can see how easy it is to utilize. The only thing that we need to remember is that some of the elements will need the backslash, like you saw the HR tag. And in addition to that, all the classes are going to be called class name and not just class. So if there is a problem like this here, it did, by hovering over it, did tell me the fact that it requires a closing tag for HR. So you will find that there's support available from this piece of software and some add-ons that you can include into Visual Studio Code that just makes debugging really simple. So let's just add that backslash. Okay, so next up then, we're going to put our project on GitHub. So if you haven't used GitHub before, this is going to be a little introduction to GitHub and how to get started with GitHub using the GitHub Desktop tool. So you will eventually migrate to potentially a command line interface for GitHub. But to begin with, for new beginners to GitHub, I think that the desktop is a good way to start deploying your applications. Right, so then to start off, let's just go to GitHub or desktop.github.com, or just type in GitHub Desktop and just download. So we're going to download for Windows. This should be available on other operating systems, Mac and maybe Linux. So we're just going to download this for Windows and just go through the process of installing. Right, so once it's downloaded, the installation process is fairly simple. We will need to create a new GitHub account in a second if you haven't already done so. So straight away it says sign in to github.com. So what we can do here is just create a new account. So it is free. So let's go ahead and create a new account. So go ahead, create a new account, and I'll see you back in the installation process where we're signing in. Okay, so once you've created a new account on github.com, let's go back into our GitHub Desktop and sign into github.com. So right, and then we sign in. Okay, so authorize GitHub Desktop. So we authorize the desktop onto our account. Nope. Okay, so we're now signing into github.com. Of course, it's recommended not to select no because it was needed to make that sign in, but we can do that in a second. Yes, there we go. So now we're signed in. Right, so I'll just press continue there and finish. So there we go. We now have our desktop, GitHub Desktop sorted. So what we can now do is build a new repository. So let's just quickly explain what this is all about. So let's just keep this nice and simple. GitHub is a place where we can store our code. So we can create new projects or repositories, and then within those repositories we place our code for our applications. So what we can then do is create different versions of our application. So let's just create a new repository. And I'm going to call this repository new website. And I'm going to create a public. So if you're paying for this, then you can create private repositories so no one can see your code. So I'm creating a public repository so others potentially can see my code. So I'm just going to call this actually just website. So I create a new repository. I'm going to initialize with a README. So this now is a repository where I can put some code or my project. So at the moment, all it has is a README file. So let's just go ahead and let's just manually do this. So in GitHub, what we can now do on the desktop, GitHub Desktop, is we can now clone our repository. So we define where we want to put our repository. Let's just refresh our list. So I refresh the list. Notice now what you can see is the repository that I made earlier is now available. So Vercel website, that's the repository that I just built on the website. So what I can do now is I can clone this. So let's just choose a simple. So I'm going to put GitHub in a folder called GitHub on my local path. I'm just going to clone that repository that I've made. It's now been cloned from the website to my C drive inside a folder called GitHub. There it is. So let's just go ahead and copy. What we're going to do is we're going to copy this project here. So we're going to copy everything apart from the node modules. I'm going to Control C that, go back into my GitHub folder, and then paste it right there. Skip that file. So we've got the README file here. So I basically put my project inside of this folder. So what's happened now is that it's detected the fact that changes have been made in my project. So I can now see all the different changes that have been made. Obviously, I've just put this into the folder, so everything is a change at the moment. So if I type in something here and press commit, this is going to commit this project locally. So it keeps a record of all the changes that I've made. And then I can click this button here, push to origin. So what that's going to do is basically push all this code over to the website where I'm storing my project. So now when I refresh this page here, ta-da, you can see that all my project files are now here. And I'm storing them here. Obviously it's public, so anyone else can see them. But obviously if I created private repositories, I can maybe work with a smaller amount of people in my team, etc., and we can work together. So this is a versioning tool, which essentially means that I can make different versions of this or copies of it, and I can work on that individually. So going back to this idea of components, so in React, we're going to be building components. So if you're working in big teams, maybe you're working on individual components. So what we can do here is make copies of branches of your application, and you can work individually on those branches, and then you can take those branches and put it into your kind of master project here, and that's how you can essentially utilize, or you would utilize a tool like this. But the point here is that we've now copied all of our files here across to GitHub, and now we're ready to deploy this onto our web server. So what we need to do now is head over to Vercel and sign up and get everything connected to our repository here, so that Vercel can take all these files and then put them on the internet and serve them from its web server. So we're nearly there. So next step, like I've just said, we're going to now deploy our website from GitHub to Vercel server, so it's then deployed on the internet. So let's go back into our virtual machine. Now we need to head over to Vercel. Oh no, Vercel. So like I said, essentially Vercel is a web server service that allows us to deploy Next.js projects as well as other types of projects. So what we need to do is sign up to this. So go ahead and sign up, and I'll see you on the next step. We'll also note, that we're going to continue using GitHub. So we're going to actually sign in utilizing GitHub. So we just need to click on GitHub, and then it's going to ask me about whether I want GitHub to access. So make sure you're logged into the right GitHub. In this case, mine's called Very Academy Demo. So I'm going to authorize access to that project, or my project, in a second. So customize my new account, Very Academy Demo. And then the username is going to be that. So that's absolutely fine. Yep. So I press continue. And there we go. So all I need to do now is import the repository that I've set up. So I press continue. Now let's go back to GitHub. So this is the repository link for this repository. So I copy and paste that right there. It will then link itself to that. So yep, it's my personal account. So I then select personal account, press continue. So this would be a paid option. And there we go. Now I need to select the repository it should have access to. I've only got one at the moment. So I select that, and then I press install. Okay, so that's verifying the connection. I'm now going to import the project. I don't need to press anything else here. It is a next project. So I press deploy, and what's going to happen now, it's going to copy all the files across, and it's going to now try deploy it on the server, and then it should be accessible on the web. So that should take a couple of seconds. If there is any problems, it will tell us that there's problems, but there shouldn't be any problems here. It is a default project after all, with just a few different changes. Okay, so once you've deployed, we can then open the dashboard. It will tell you where the website is. So this is where the application is installed or available on the web. So let's just go ahead and click here. That's going to open up a new tab. And this is the URL to the app that's now available on the web. So we've created a website. We've got some links here to the different pages, and everything is working absolutely great. Okay, so there we have it. We've deployed. So what's important to understand here, how this is going to work, is that every time we update our repository and push it to the web page, it's going to automatically update our server. So if we added some new functionality now to our site and we went ahead and made the changes, uploaded it to GitHub, like I said, it would then update, it would then redeploy and update on our website. So the problem at the moment is that we've started this deployment in a new folder called GitHub here. So obviously we would wanted to deploy here in this folder called next. So let's just go ahead and just change our folder. So what we're going to do now, I just want to give you a view of the workflow here. So in GitHub, I'm just going to take this folder, and this, because this is where the project is, or we moved the project for GitHub. So I'm just going to open this folder up inside of my Visual Studio Code. So this is where we were before. Happy days. So what happens is that let's just make a change. So let's just make a change to the blog. I'm just going to say this is the blog. So when I make a change here, now remember I'm working in this GitHub folder for this project. So when I make a change here, it's automatically going to be picked up in this GitHub Desktop tool, and it tells me what change has been made. So I can say, okay, I'm happy with that. So I press new commit or make a comment about the commit, press commit to master. So that's saved locally. Now what I need to do is push to origin. So if I do that, that's going to upload to the GitHub webpage, update my repository there. And now if I go ahead to Vercel, it says waiting to build finish because it's detected that there's been an update on GitHub. So it's now going to rebuild this project. So we'll give it a couple of seconds. And there we go. So it took 30 seconds odd. So it now says ready. So if I go back into the web address here and go to my blog, it says now this is the blog. So you can see it's been updated online also now. And there we go. So that's generally the workflow that you're going to generate. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully I gave you enough level of information. If I haven't, let me know. Maybe it wasn't as basic as what you wanted it to be. Please let me know again. I can recreate it and add some more detail and so on. I do intend, this is a whole series, so I do intend to give you more information about Next, React, and so on throughout this series. So please stay tuned for this series. So here we covered, like you've seen now, the installation process, creating a new project, running the server, closing, stopping the server. A quick tour around the folder and the folder structure. More importantly, the pages, how pages can be created in folders and how we can then link them across. So I gave you a masterclass almost in the different ways of using CSS within React and Next. And then we imported Bootstrap and utilized some of those components to start building our website. So remember that this is using JSX. So we need to be careful of that when we incorporate CSS and use HTML within our pages. We then almost fumbled around with GitHub. We signed up, we got the desktop working, and I have shown you the general principles of it. It's not necessarily a very good workflow. Remember that make a new repository first on your drive and then utilize that folder for your project and then make the updates. So we then deployed to the web server, Vercel. So you need to be careful how many times you deploy. If you go into their website and have a look at the pricing, for example. So like I said, this is a free service. So you do have Loads of tools available here, but they do add some limitations. There is a list of limitations somewhere on here. So there's only so many times you can update it per day. It's something about 50 or 100. But this will grow with you. So there's a lot of resource here for free. Once you get to a certain size, I guess you're going to start paying for this product. But for testing out new applications and starting off, this can be a good service. An alternative to this might be, for example, Google Firebase, or of course AWS. You could deploy on also, if you know what that is, the Amazon service. So there's 3 different tools that you could utilize to deploy something like this. So thank you very much. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you didn't like it, well, just let me know. If you did like it, let me know. It's always good to get feedback and to work out what I can do to change and make things better. I know that in this stage here, the GitHub, I could probably redo that again. Hopefully you get the gist of it. I do have some other GitHub videos which you can go through to get the general principles of utilizing GitHub. If I don't see you again, good luck with your development. But if you do like the content and you want to subscribe, please subscribe. There'll be plenty more content coming soon.